Hello, I'm Chelmsford Town Manager Paul Cohen, and welcome to the October 2020 edition of the Town Managers Roundtable. I'm joined today by Finance Director John Sousa, and we're going to speak today regarding the October 19th Fall Annual Town Meeting. We've got a total of 19 articles on the warrant for the Fall Town Meeting, and so in the next half hour, John and I will sort of give an overview of those articles to help those of you preparing for the meeting or maybe otherwise interested in the happenings of the community. So the first one is welcome, John. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me back.
As we start out, why don't we head into the town meeting? Can you just give those watching, sort of a summary of how the town finished the past fiscal year when the pandemic struck and how things are going at this current time?
Sure. We were fortunate. We finished the fiscal year 20 on June 30th, and we ended the year in the black. We finished with about just over $1.7 million in free cash, which is great for the town. Our revenues came in on track because we were fortunate that we really had just about almost 3 quarters into the books before the height of the pandemic struck. So we really only had 1 quarter where some of the local sources of revenue, like meals tax, hotel tax, were impacted by the pandemic. But our property taxes and excise taxes came in on target, so we were fortunate.
Yeah, so basically that free cash number was almost identical to the prior fiscal year. So
exactly,
overall, we're in a good spot.
Exactly. So we ended the year in a great spot, and it kind of positions us for this year. We were fortunate when we started to plan this current fiscal year budget that we were very conservative, and it now appears that state aid is going to come in above the amount that we planned. So that's going to help the town fiscally in this fiscal year.
Yeah, it's real, and we'll see this in our discussion, how it's allowing us to address some capital investments such as road work, sidewalks, and some improvements in the schools, which I know we'll get into shortly. So we're in a good spot. So again, to move into the town meeting, it's going to be held this year on Monday, October 19th. It'll be in the high school gym, again, much like we were in June. There'll be plenty of space for social distancing, and people wear masks. And again, the public, even if they aren't town meeting reps, can come and attend and voice their concerns or thoughts to the community. At the beginning of all these town meetings, we tend to put what we call the consent agenda, which are articles which are more traditional business that don't take up a lot of time. First one in this would be reports of town committees. We'll hear a couple of reports from the Vision and Values Committee, from the Stormwater Master Plan Committee. You'll give the 5-year financial forecast of the town, and which is good. And also I'll provide sort of an overview for the town meeting. And then we get into, again, the perfunctory items. The Cemetery Commission, again, is back seeking $50,000 from the Cemetery Fund for their ongoing expansion of Pine Ridge Cemetery. I think they're at the loaming and seeding stage at this point, and again, it's just part of that ongoing progress. And if you go by there, you can really see the work that's taken place.
Yeah, and the superintendent explained, I think he's looking to expand the columbarium space that they have, so they're doing a lot of improvements there. Which
is great. And then from there, we have to vote an $11,000 use of the Commonwealth infrastructure monies, which comes from the 10-cent a ride surcharge for the Uber and Lyft type of device. So again, that's a perfunctory article. And then we go into the Sewer Construction Stabilization Fund, which you oversee. So why don't you just give a quick overview of what happens there?
Just to give folks just a quick explanation on that, each year we receive interest earnings on our sewer betterment funds and our sewer capital improvement funds. And what happens is those monies by state law, the interest money gets deposited into the general fund. So we need a vote of town meeting each year after the fiscal year closes to set those interest earnings aside into a sewer construction stabilization fund. And people ask, why do we do that? The reason is because we need to dedicate those interest earnings and set them aside so we can pay the debt service this year and out through 2031 in the sewer project. So
because that was part of the financial plan for the project. This is just the mechanism of putting the money in. So again, $335,000 will go in there, which was the interest from the last year. And then from there, we have a new appearing article, the Affordable Housing Stabilization Fund. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, folks. You have to think, it goes back a few years, but back in town meeting in 2015, town meeting authorized the creation of a affordable housing stabilization fund as part of the inclusionary housing bylaw. And at that time, it authorized the creation of the fund, but we didn't have any deposits that we received. And if people are wondering what's this all about, basically what that did is allowed, if a developer is doing a project, it gives them an option rather than having to build, say, affordable units themselves, they can make a contribution to the town to be used for affordable housing, and it goes into the stabilization fund. And since that time, we've received 2 deposits from 2 projects. One was Grist Mill that everyone's familiar with in Chelmsford Center, and then off of Littleton Road. And we need a vote of town meeting. We actually need a 2/3 vote to appropriate these monies into the fund.
Right, so what'll happen is when a project does come up, then the town meeting would vote by a 2/3 vote to take the money and use it for a particular use.
Yes.
So this is really more of a transactional article as opposed to an expenditure article.
And we will set up a separate fund for that account.
Okay, and then Article 6 and 7 is no action. Those are placeholders for collective bargaining agreements and for any changes to the current fiscal year's operating budget, so there'll be no action there. We then get to Article 8, which is sort of the first substantive article, and that's to acquire a 0.14 acre parcel of land for conservation purposes on Parker Road. We have a map that shows what that parcel looks like, and basically the reason for this interest is it's sort of a parcel that fronts Parker Road. It's in that blue centerpiece that you can see on the map right on Parker Road, and below it, to the south, is the conservation land. And then to the north of it, on the other side, is the Warrant Pole property. So you got Wright Reservation below it and Warrant Pole. And so this thing is just sort of this orphan parcel in the middle there, and the estate of that holds that property came to the town and basically wanted to know if the town had interest. Again, it's more just to expand an existing corridor. It's only a nominal amount of money. It's $16,200. And so it just adds more frontage to the Wright Reservation. And that's about the area where the parking area is at Wright Reservation, if you're familiar with that area. So again, Conservation Commission requested it. It's a nominal amount, and it just fills in that corridor. So once that's enacted by the town, we then go into a substantive article of money in terms of $3.4 million to renovate and expand the North Fire Station. And we have a photo that shows the North Fire Station, for those of you who are familiar with it. It's on Princeton Street. That's a 1950s vintage fire station that was constructed by the town when it was a call department. And it's obviously been maintained, and you can see the exterior is still solid from that time, but basically it doesn't meet the needs as we're in the 3rd decade of the 21st century. So it's at the end of its useful life in terms of codes and just the modern issues of living quarters and so forth. And we've got a couple of photos that sort of show, the vintage date of the facility. You can see there's the bathroom and locker areas. Again, they're only for one gender. Again, it was meant for a call department. And the lockers are in the hallways. You can see the bunk beds. If you go to the next slide, the bunk room is sort of, off of the apparatus bay. Again, if you have multiple genders, or even in days of COVID like today, you don't have healthy private quarters. The one on the left is sort of the exercise room, which is in the apparatus bay. Again, they've made use and space of it, but it's at the point now where the building is worn, it's tired, and what needs to take place is basically what they're going to do is they looked at the options, the Permanent Building Committee, with the fire chief, and they came back with the most effective option is to leave the apparatus bay, but to come in with a modular building, very, very similar to what we did at the school expansion recently, in terms of we'd call it prefabrication or modular. Basically these are solid buildings that are built in factories and it's brought on site, and they last 50 plus years, whatever, for the foreseeable future. And we have a photo of what it will look like. And so again, what will happen there is you'll have a 2-story with the living quarters, and then the apparatus bay will remain, and there'll be 2 bays. They'll do some modifications so you can have 2 bays that drive through on that site. Again, the cost is $3.4 million. John, explain how that's sort of financed for the town.
Sure. That'll be what the town would do. Will be issuing municipal bonds, and it will be over a 20-year period. And we'll be able to fit that into our non-excluded debt service. So there'll be no need to have any a debt exclusion vote or anything. It's going to fit within our existing debt service schedule. And our non-excluded debt, as I presented to the Finance Committee, and that will continue to be level or declining in the years ahead. So.
Right, because what we're doing is we're paying down the previous debt for the Adams Library, the police
Yes,
station.
we have. Yes, those buildings will be the bond payments will be retired at the end of fiscal year 21 for most of those, and we're continuing to pay down other projects. So we'll be in good shape with the debt service budget.
Yeah, and the reason this fire station was chosen, we have obviously 5 fire stations. The town, within the last decade, rebuilt the center headquarters next to the town offices, and in any configuration going forward in the future, the North Fire Station, which is this project here, remains with the community. So that is the investment at this time. The community will then decide at a later date which and how to go forward with the 3 other stations, which were built in the 60s, in terms of the future for those. But this is clearly the next step in that process. I mean, the town owns and operates over almost 30 buildings, and so as you said, the whole idea is to avoid spikes in the tax rate and just have a long-term plan on how to maintain our facilities, which, again, I think we've done a great job, as evidenced by the successful remote and in-school hybrid learning that's going on in the schools now, where everything's functioning and things are going really well. So
yeah, I think the modular idea is a great option, as the facilities director explained, because the construction time appears to be much shorter than if it was to be stick-built, piece by piece.
exactly,
on site.
and it's more cost-effective too, which is a great thing. So turning that sort of introduces us into the capital articles on the warrant, which I know you chair the capital planning committee for the town. You brought sort of a modified capital plan to town meeting in June when the fiscal uncertainty sort of at that point in time saw that we thought it was going to be a little more stringent than what's transpired. So, and we also heard some concerns from the town meeting about some investment. So why don't you give an overview of the capital proposal that's coming to fall town meeting?
Sure. So we have 5 projects that we're bringing forth to town meeting, and as you said, we heard some concerns back at the spring town meeting, and we said at that time that if finances allowed, we would bring some high priority projects to fall town meeting. And the projects include road improvements, because we know we have over 200 miles of roadways in town that need constant maintenance. We also have some sidewalk construction and repair funds for $350,000. Firefighter turnout gear is another important item. These are actually the protective suits and boots that firefighters wear when they respond to a call. That's $115,000. 2 important high-priority school projects. One's the Parker School kitchen renovation for $373,000, and then the auditorium facility renovation at the McCarthy Middle School. And during these times with the modified school schedule and talking with school administration, this is actually a great time to be able for the facilities division and vendors to be able to go into the Parker School, because with the modified school schedule actually not serving food presently. So they'll be able to go in and totally renovate the kitchen facility from top to bottom without having to do it, in small pieces. And then the same thing with the McCarthy Auditorium. As we've mentioned in the past, the McCarthy School dates to the 1950s. And while it certainly had repairs over the years when, minor items have failed, it's never had a full renovation. And so that item is $740,000. Some of the major components, and I'll get more into this at town meeting, are the lighting system, the audio-visual system, and the seating. Those are the main components of that project.
Yeah, and as you noted, it's a good time to be doing this when school is in a limited capacity operation, where they're not using the auditorium, they're not using the kitchens at the school. But 2 other things that are helpful is, one is it's a great bidding climate, because you can get bidders to perform this work in a period where work is being sought. But John, also one of the great things is the interest rate climate, the lending market. Could you just sort of take a few moments and sort of talk about what the towns are getting now for an interest? Like when we borrow for a project like this, the kind of interest rates the town gets.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. With the Federal Reserve lowering interest rates so low to try to stimulate the economy, a town like ours that has a AA+ bond rating, typically, and what I've seen, just received a report this week, it depends on the term of the bond that you're going for, but it wouldn't be uncommon for us to see on a 10-year bond probably an interest rate of around 1%. I would say for 15 and 20-year purposes it may be 2.5, but it's extremely low. much lower than what we've seen in the past. So.
I mean, these are rates that just sort of blow your mind when you think about it, because, in terms of for borrowing, like I said, you almost want to do as many things as you could right now because of the favorable interest market.
And we'll be locked in when we borrow, should rates ever decline. I mean, it's unlikely they would decline lower from these historic lows, but if they did, we can always do what's called a bond refunding, and we've done that many times. But we're locked in at these low interest rates once we issue the bond.
It's a fixed rate borrowing, not variable. So there's not a concern that if there was an inflationary period that all of a sudden the town's cost would increase. But there's a flip side to that, John. We got a minute.
Right.
Tell us how this affects the town's interest earnings on the other
flip
side of the equation.
It's good on the one hand, not so. As an investor, so when the town deposits our funds either in banks and CDs, purchases bonds, the issue right now is our interest rates, and we saw this just as far as like in March, same bank account, interest rates dramatically lowered. If we were getting 1.75 before the COVID pandemic, after the Federal Reserve made all of those rate reductions, we could be down near under 0.5% in some bank accounts. So it dramatically lowers, it will dramatically lower our interest earnings.
Yeah, so that's the flip side. And obviously that's the reason it's done is the federal government, and not only U.S., but around the world, they're trying to stimulate construction and economic activity by having people use money, so and therefore create jobs and create expansion. So, well, great. Thank you, John, for that overview on the capital budget. From there, we go to a series of free cash articles, and as you noted, John, the town finished the year with roughly $1.7 million in free cash, and then a portion of that was the money that goes into that sewer construction stabilization fund. So we got roughly almost $1.4 million in free cash remaining. And what happened at town meeting is there's a series of 4 articles on 3 of which use free cash and 2 petitioned articles as well on whether to use stabilization fund to reduce the property tax levy. Maybe as a background, John, if you could sort of explain or take a moment to explain that how the current budget is funded in terms of use of the stabilization fund, and just take a moment to explain that.
Sure, and this is not something that we often do, but because of the pandemic and we saw that it was going to impact the economy nationwide and certainly here in Massachusetts, we made the decision to use $2 million of general stabilization funds to sort of replace lost revenue that would come either from excise taxes or meals and hotel taxes, other sources. So we withdrew $2 million to supplement the fiscal year 21 budget. In my opinion, it's important that, and I'll explain this at town meeting, that using the 1.4 million it replenishes most of that withdrawal. And that's important because fiscal year 22 may be a particularly challenging year.
And that would start next July of 21 through June of 22.
So as we plan that year, it's entirely possible that we may have to withdraw another 2 million. So if we can replenish 1.4 million in, that sets us up for the next fiscal year if we have to withdraw 2 million again without depleting the fund.
Okay, so and so what's being proposed under the 2 petitioned articles from Paul Regazzi is he has one article to use $1 million of free cash to instead apply additional relief to this current fiscal year, and then the other one's an unspecified amount. John, based on the information we have at this point, and again, it's a projection, but on a typical year, the town's tax bill would go up a few $100s, $3, whatever. Again, because it's a lot of variables, because you're talking about what type of property, whether it's a single-family home or condo. You're also talking about the change in values within residential versus commercial. But on a typical year, it'd be a few $100s the tax bill would go up.
About $325, $350 something.
Exactly, but based upon this year, by applying the town stabilization fund, as the name suggests, to stabilize the community during a difficult financial period, I think the estimates that I'm hearing from the assessors is the average tax bill at this point, without applying any free cash, would be probably $50 to $100.
That's what they're looking at. It's very preliminary, and as you said, everyone's home value is different. So this is for the average single-family residence that's probably has a assessed value somewhere between, say, $450,000 to $480,000. I'll just give round figures. Yeah. But a person in a home of that value range could expect a bill to increase about roughly 50 to 100, which is significantly less than we've seen in the past.
Right, and so what this article do, I think the intent of the petitioner, Mr. Regazio, is that basically he would just have no tax increase. I think the concerns that I have is, as you said, this may not be a single fiscal year problem. And so you want to apply some of that savings to sort of smooth it out and then have some relief next year. Whereas if you apply it all and have no increase, you'll likely then get a bounce back at a time, because if you don't have the reserves, and meanwhile your spending and expenditures are still constant, then you're going to get a jump at a point where your tax increase then goes almost to the hundreds of dollars per year.
Right, and if people are watching and say, well, what do you mean by a bounce back? What we're saying is if you don't, tax dollars are recurring revenue, but if we use free cash or stabilization funds, that's one-time revenue. If we use it and then we don't have that same amount of revenue available from free cash the next year, then you get this bounce back effect, because in effect you have to replace the free cash funds with tax dollars.
And by taxing up to the full levy limit.
Right.
So what we're doing now is we're going under the levy limit by a few $1 million, and then you'd go back up again, because we know there are costs in the future. You saw that with Middlesex retirement assessment going up in the future,
Rubbish
trash costs,
disposal and recycling.
contracts for personnel, wages, and so forth. So that sort of takes those articles from 11 through 15. From there, in our, we then move into a zoning article by the planning board, and it's for an historic preservation and reuse bylaw, and it's quite lengthy, and so I don't want to try to give it justice, but I think what I'll summarize it as is the planning board is, over the past couple of years, has brought forth articles in an effort to preserve historic properties as opposed to them being torn down. And it's always gotten caught up with the fact is the financial incentive of putting a preservation restriction on a property would be the additional creation of a house lot. And so I believe what's happened in this article, and again, it'll be detailed at the town meeting, is they restricted the properties to to anything only built before 1800, and depending upon certain lot sizes. So that's the discussion that will take place under the Historic Preservation and Reuse Bylaw. At this point, the Planning Board supports it, majority of the Finance Committee supports it, and majority of the Board of Select Board supports it. So again, I'm sure there'll be discussion at town meeting, and then there'll be a decision made. And because it is a zoning bylaw, it requires a 2/3 approval to pass. Following that article is Article 17, which is a wildlife feeding article. And as the name suggests, this has to deal with the feeding by residential property owners of wildlife, whether it's wild turkeys, deer, bear, what have you. And the concern that the select board has had is from the neighbors is that, like anything else, most things are fine, but when somebody gets into an excess or a problem situation, it not only has an adverse impact perhaps on the person who does it, but their neighbors. And so what this would do is this would allow the town's animal control officer to respond to a nuisance and in essence to cease the activity because of the health concerns, and perhaps damage to property, by opposing a period of, a graduated period of fines from a warning to fines and so forth. And so that's what's taking place here. We certainly have seen some instances with wild turkeys and so forth where, they can have, like I said, anything that's in excess can have a concern on a property owner.
Yeah, it's interesting. In my neighborhood, I've lived there for decades, and I have never, the wild turkey population seems to have just exploded. You see large groups of them on the roads and the sides of the roads and in yards.
Okay, thank you. And then the final two articles have to do with sewer capacity. And we'll touch on our last couple minutes here. Article 18 is a request for funding to do a sewer capacity study. Let me just take a moment on the sewer capacity. The town, as we know, for the last generation or so, has gone to a town-wide sewer system where all properties in town were offered the opportunity to tie into sewer and mandated to tie in if they were within reasonable distance of the sewer mains. It was known by the Sewer Commission almost 20 years ago that there would be a insufficient capacity under our agreement with Lowell to tie everybody in. And so they created back in 2002 a sewer capacity fund, which was a surcharge based on sewer projects going forward. And things sort of continued along. It was, there was a study done in 2010 and 2012, and then for most of the past decade, things were fine until we saw this transformation of housing, which has sort of accelerated the use of the capacity. And that's really the multifamilies. you've seen apartment growth on, on Turnpike Road, on Gorham Street. The units are being built on Littleton Road, in the center, and so forth. And so it's at the point now where we've imposed a sewer moratorium in order to prevent more large projects to come in, but give time to have a study done. And so what this study would do, as shown on our final slide for our program today, is the study would provide funding to assess the town's ultimate sewer capacity needs in terms of what are we sending to the facility in Lowell, what can the facility use, what's needed in our town, is it possible to get an expansion of that facility, or do we look for other options, perhaps even constructing a wastewater treatment facility off of Watton Street and at Southwell, and then do some site work if that is deemed to be an option. And so again, the money that isn't the tax levy, it's from that sewer capacity fund, which has over $2.3 million, again, because it was foreseen that this would occur. And then the last article, the final article under Article 19, is a general bylaw amendment on sewer connections, which again, it's worked with town council to get a clarification to make it clear that people no longer have to tie into the sewer system and make, however, unless it proposes and presents an economic threat to ecological threat to the environment. Because no one wants a situation where you're damaging either groundwater or any other kind of hazardous material. So that's sort of the use, and that will be our town meeting. Again, we welcome everybody to come to our town meeting on Monday, October 18th. It'll be televised on Chelmsford Telemedia per usual. And again, if you have concerns, reach out to your town meeting reps, or come to the town meeting and voice your concerns directly. John, I want to thank you for being here. Any closing thoughts in our last few seconds?
No, thank you, and I'm refining it right now, but I'll have a 5-year forecast available, and that will be presented in Article 1, so that will give people kind of a sense of where we're going.
Great, and then the Finance Committee's recommendations are on the town's website in terms for the town meeting, and so if you need information, please don't hesitate to reach any of us. Thank you, and take care.